Hello and welcome to the Cornish Witch podcast. I'm your host Freyja, a witch who lives in Cornwall but who isn't a born and bred Cornish maid. In part one of this two-part episode, my guest is Meghan Field. You might remember her featuring on the Witch Festival episode. Meghan shares her transformative journey from the United States of America to Cornwall, exploring her deep connection to spirituality, witchcraft, and community. She discusses her upbringing in a Catholic family, her experiences in Nicaragua, and how these shaped her identity as a witch, and her advocacy for women within her career path. Meghan emphasises the importance of the divine feminine, the impact of the queer movement, and her commitment to creating inclusive spaces for healing and growth. The conversation highlights the significance of land, lineage, and the gift economy in her life and work. Meghan, welcome to the Cornish Witch podcast, or welcome back, I should be saying.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm so glad to have you here today and in this space. We are going to talk about your witchcraft journey, you coming to Cornwall, Sacred Kerno, and I know we're going to go off on lots of little probably side quests and side stories, which I'm all very excited to talk about. But I guess the first thing I would like to sort of get started with would be just to ask you about your journey coming over to England, because you are an American witch, your journey to Cornwall and how you ended up in this sacred land.
Okay, well, so yes, I'm originally from the unceded and the stolen lands of the Wampanoag, who are the indigenous folks of Turtle Island of America in the Northeast where I was born. It's currently known as Boston, Massachusetts, but I was raised just 20 minutes south of Boston, actually only about an hour away from Plymouth, Massachusetts. And now I live about 35 minutes away from Plymouth, England, which is a really interesting turn of the pathway in the journey of my life. So yeah, I was raised in a very sort of middle class family. Both of my parents were teachers, and I'm the oldest of three, and we were raised just with Boston on our doorstep, but very much a suburban way of living. And I was 18 when I first sort of left my family nest. I went to university about 4 hours away in the mountains of Vermont. And I did my junior year abroad in Spain. I lived in Spain for about a year. And as many people, many of my peers did at the time. Then when I graduated from uni, I moved back to Boston. And I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I was, again, kind of growing up in this education-oriented, very middle-class way of living. It was like, okay, not only are you going to go to a really great high school, but you're also going to go to a really great uni. And then you're probably going to go on to some sort of graduate school and then have, quite a good job. Like it was just this pathway that it wasn't ever dictated to me. And I never felt like a huge amount of pressure. It was just like, this is how it's done.
Yeah.
Like it's done. So I was really convinced that I was going to become a lawyer. And so walked along this pathway of, I graduated like second in my class from high school. I did like university level courses when I was already in high school. I went to a really good uni called Middlebury and studied philosophy and Spanish because those are really good. It was a really good foundation to go to law school. And then after I graduated uni, I moved back to Boston. I really was also very interested in women's rights and equality. And so out of uni, what I had intended to do was work for a domestic abuse service, because I found this job when I was just about to graduate and it looked really good. Right before I graduated, that service was defunded. So for about 9 months, I ended up working in an emergency mental health service.
Oh, okay.
So, which was like going from a very academic sort of, I guess, highbrow world of university living into really the forefront of mental health and vulnerability.
Very eye-opening.
It was very eye-opening.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is not my future. I don't want to go into social work. I do want to get back. I gotta find my way back to law school. Why I wanted to work for the domestic abuse charity or the domestic abuse service was that I was really focused on human rights. And so I thought that was in gender and gender equality. So I thought domestic abuse being both the cause and consequence of gender inequality, I thought, let's go work for there. But then that got sidebarred. And then I ended up in a crisis mental health service, saw a lot of things, and actually essentially like as an anchor for, as an anchor for the universal and fundamental human rights. Like it was hugely important and actually incredibly formative, but it was just not something that, given the stress levels and everything, like it was just not something that, it wasn't my passion in my heart. So I ended up finding a human rights and immigration law firm and worked for about a year and a half for a firm called Barker Epstein and Liskeard, which did a huge amount, like was part of some really groundbreaking immigration law in Massachusetts, which had impacts and influence nationally. It was a very small firm and I loved it. But it did two things for me. One, convinced me quite quickly I didn't want to be a lawyer. I was a paralegal there and I got to know how the legal system works. And even though we were doing such great things around human rights, it just wasn't for me. Again, like it started and stopped a few times, but like in my life. But because I spoke Spanish, the partner, Rodney Barker, who I was working for, he had me help him with some of his charitable work. So Rodney started going to Nicaragua in the 1980s after Nicaragua had experienced a revolution and went from a dictatorship to the Sandinistas being in power. And in the very early 80s, Rodney had started a sister city organization with a group of people from Massachusetts outside of Boston. And because I spoke Spanish, this charity was still going. He was like, come and, in addition to all of your paralegal work, can you just make this phone call to Nicaragua for me? Can you just fire off this email in Spanish for me? And I got really, really curious about all of this work, right?
Yeah.
And all of this, international solidarity work and what I guess, sustainable community development could look like in a place where, from a perspective of not like, we're not these white saviors coming from the north to tell you what to do in your, in your third world country. We're really interested in community development that comes from and is informed by the needs of the community, and then looking at how we can distribute resources in a different way. So I was really keen to understand the work of Sister City and Rodney's work. So I got very curious. And then after a couple of months, I said, Rodney, I'd really like to go to Nicaragua. Like, I'd really like to meet all these people. Like, I'm, at the heart of who I am is like, is social justice oriented. So he gave me a leave of absence when I was 23 to go. I went for 2 months to Nicaragua and my life completely changed. Began to understand life and power and privilege in a totally different way. I met tons of people there. And that began a 5-year journey where I co-founded the first lending library in Central America with a group of Americans, North Americans and Central Americans. We developed a mobile library program, a literacy program, and the Biblioteca San Juan del Sur is a massive community center now, and a center of information, literacy, and education. So, and amongst doing many other things on and off for 5 years while I lived in Nicaragua, and including getting my master's, kind of doing doing some of my master's in Nicaragua, but mostly in Boston and going back and forth. But for those 5 years, I didn't go to law school, spoiler, but I got my master's in gender and cultural studies. And basically, whilst I was in Nicaragua doing community development work and kind of living a life that I guess I continue to strive to get back to. So I was living in a beach community, woke up with a beautiful view of the sea every day, got to do really important work alongside really passionate people, studied and learned, was continually learning in basically this really warm and beautiful country. And then I met my ex-husband as people do, tipsy in a bar. And my ex-husband was a German guy living in London. And so we dated for a year, long distance, as I was finishing my master's, and then decided to move from Nicaragua to London and join him. And that was in 2006. And so I've been living in the UK for, in June, it'll be 20 years. I'll have my 20th anniversary of living here. Yeah. And so I started off in London and, came here in June 2006, only knowing my ex-husband and not knowing really what I was going to work in. I felt like I was really keen to work in international development, but there just weren't any jobs going. And I saw a job in, this is how old I am, saw a job in, I think, a newspaper. like not even online. Like
we still have those.
I mean, you know, but like, I'm not testing newspapers.
Yeah.
So I was seeing a job for an independent domestic violence advisor. I was living in Fulham at the time, and this was in Ladbroke Grove in London, so not too far away. And I remembered that, you know, my first job out of uni was meant to, this was, 6-7 years later, was meant to be, working in domestic abuse. So I went to the Lighthouse building, which is an amazing place. It's now like sort of some brand museum or something, but it was the Lighthouse building in Ladbroke Grove was where Princess Diana had her, did so much of her AIDS work.
Oh, okay.
It was an LGBT center for many, many years. And so I went, and I remember sitting across from my now friend Kylie, who was interviewing me, being like, I'm not going to lie. I know nothing about the law here. I've only just moved. But what I am is really smart and really passionate. And I will, anything you give, like, I'm so dedicated to equality. Like, whatever you give me to do, I will do. And they hired me. They took a massive chance and hired me. And I became one of the first independent domestic violence advisors, or IDVAs, in the UK in 2006. And my career in violence against women and girls has spanned so many different things. From, I've been in policy and strategy. I've been a domestic abuse and sexual violence coordinator. I've been a violence against women and girls strategic lead in London. I've been I've co-founded national initiatives like the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance. I've written policy and training programs that have now been mainstreamed into practice here in the UK. I've chaired domestic homicide reviews, and I've been a director of the largest women's charity in London. And now I'm the violence against women and girls strategic lead for the city of Plymouth. But how did I get to Plymouth? So, so yeah, that's been my career, I would say, has been in violence against women and girls, which started, really soon after I moved here. I fall in love here, right? And I, that love no longer exists. He still is moving through the world, but the love no longer exists. We do have a beautiful son together. So love brought me over here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I left my husband in 2018. And in 2020, in June 2020, I'm a Gemini. I'm a June, like my son was born in June. Like I met my ex-husband in June. I met my current husband in June. I moved here in June. I'm like
very really synchronistic.
I am like sitting on the balcony of my life being like, what's this June gonna bring me? So in June 2020, I feel like I've met my two husbands in very pedantic ways. For someone who's like witchy and spiritual, like one I met in a bar and the other one I met on Tinder. But yeah, I met my husband, Marcus, on Tinder, and within a very short period of time he's Cornish, born and bred.
Mm-hmm.
He can trace his Cornish ancestry back as far as records go, mainly to the Redruth area. And he was born at Redruth Women's Hospital, which is no longer a thing. So yeah, I met him, and the first time I came to Cornwall, first and foremost, I didn't know that, like, the many times I've been to Cornwall before, we definitely gone the Launceston route, like have gone inland. And I was like, what is this bridge? I have an irrational fear of bridges. And that's a whole side.
We've got a few around here.
Yeah. The whole side quest is why I think that's the case, which has to do with witches. But, I remember the first time he invited me down here, I remember being like, I can't drive over bridges. Like, I really I don't fear many things, but I fear bridges. And bless this man, like, this is where I was like, he's probably a keeper. He parked his car on one side of the Tamar, walked across the Tamar Bridge, met me on the side street, and then drove my car over. And now I've driven over it twice today alone. But, so I remember that was like, no, he's a keeper. But then, a few weeks later, it was the same weekend, actually, because I had sent a bunch of books to his house. Before we had met a few times. He had come to visit me in Surrey, and I'd Amazon books to his house the weekend I was coming down here for the first time. And he was like, you have mail at my house? And I was like, yeah, I've sent some books about ancient sacred sites and stone circles. So just keep those aside for me. And he's like, okay. And I was like, that first weekend I came down, I was like, do you know, like, you live 10 minutes from the Hurler Stone Circle, and then another 15 from Dulo. And then you have these standing stones. And he's like, no, I lived here my whole life pretty much, and I did not know this. And I was like, whoa, okay. So that, the first Saturday I was up here, I was like, we have to go to the Hurlers. Let's go. And I remember standing in the center of the center circle at the Hurlers and looking at him and being like, I'm so sure that you are my future and that we are going to, whatever that means, whether it's marriage or whatever, we're going to be together. And I just felt that like that was the first very clear message I got from the land here. And probably was already getting messages from the land here way, way, way before that. But that was one that was just like crystal clear. I remember like messaging coming down, messaging coming up, and just being like, this man's my future. And so, yeah, we did long distance for 2 years. And then in 2020, when did I move down here? 2022, I moved to Cornwall to join him here. And so I say like, I think I followed my passion to Nicaragua. I followed my heart to London, and I followed it again to Cornwall. And so I think passion and love, it's like to take 1,000 years, right, to answer your question. What brought me here is love.
I think that's just such a beautiful journey. And thank you so much for sharing it. And it's so interesting as well. Really, really interesting how just the paths that you've gone and walked, which is, so nice. And I always love, because you've come from across the pond as well. And I'm always fascinated by people's stories and what brought them to Cornwall. And the work you do as well. You're such an advocate for women and girls, which is so important, which is, really incredible. With regards to spirituality and witch side of things, do you have a spiritual or witchy upbringing, or any family members at all that were witchy? I know that you said that where you're from in Boston, you're about, what was it to say, 20 minutes away from Salem, or an hour away from Salem?
It's about 20 miles.
20 miles.
20 miles as far as the crow flies. But it takes, because you have to drive through Boston from South Shore to North Shore, it takes about an hour.
Yeah.
It's Boston traffic. So I grew up, I suppose, in the shadow of Salem, right?
Yeah.
The lore around Salem and the witch trials was definitely always in the background of growing up. And, when we were in high school, we read, The Crucible and The Scarlet Letter. And I think Salem probably, I can look back now and see that, growing up so close to this witch and in very gender history, definitely influenced me in lots of different ways. My brother lived in Salem for a few years. And so as an adult, going back and just going out for dinner in Salem, because that's where my brother lived. And then for the last 15 years, as I've, I suppose, identified as very, very publicly and visibly as a witch, going back to a place that I grew up so close to and understanding its history and in a much more nuanced way has been definitely part of my, my spiritual journey. And certainly over the last decade. I think Salem in and of itself is an incredible place. There is absolutely an energy there, just as I would compare it to Glastonbury in terms of this is a place where people have made lives and have been gathering and called to for quite some time. It is very touristy, does have some of the best witchy shopping in the world. If you love a little sacred shopping, Salem's your place. But there's also, you can't help but feel the history there. And so there are lots of different tours that you can go on. I highly recommend, if you do find yourself in Salem, I highly recommend going to House Witch and Now Age Travel. About 8 years ago, I took myself off. Whenever I go home to Boston, I still call it home, even though I've lived outside of the States for much longer than I've lived in it. But my whole family, my American family, is in Boston, so it feels like my home. And so every time I go, I was just there 2 weeks ago. I make a pilgrimage, and that's what it feels like. It feels like a pilgrimage to Salem. But 8 years ago, I took myself off for a weekend on my own, and I'd never done any tours before. So I did a spiritualist tour of Salem, which was really interesting because there's not just the 1600s and the Puritan and the witch trial history, but there's, Salem has been, it's lived many lives, right?
Yeah.
And so the spiritualist churches and with understanding its influence in Salem. And then I learned how to read tarot in Salem.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to forget her name because perimenopause and mashed potatoes up in my brain. Her name probably isn't Jess, but let's just call her Jess because that's the only name that's coming to me right now. So she runs Now I Travel, and I just happened to be on a private tour with her. And what we did was we would select a card from the tarot deck. And what she had done was assign different places around Salem to each card of the tarot. And so we walked around Salem pulling cards. And so we would go from place to place, like the House of Seven Gables, the Witch Memorial, and we'd read, and she'd teach me how to read each card. I mean, granted, we probably only got to, I think we only got to about 8 or 9, but it was the process of like, this is how you can approach the tarot in this way.
Yeah.
And this is how I'd worked with Oracle cards, but I'd never worked with tarot really before. So it was about, this is how I read the cards. And what she, like, and I'm just kind of thinking about this now, like really what she unlocked for me was like how intuition and spirituality and tarot and oracle and all the tools that we use to hold up mirrors to ourselves and divination can be linked to place.
Yes.
And that was it just, and like I guess that was so early on. And like I would say my big shift of my spiritual journey, that like that's been part and parcel to how I do things. Like land, geography, and place are just as like power and privilege and social justice, like, are inextricable from who I am as a person and who I am as a witch.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like the land where you're from, and especially, yeah, with it being Salem, has had a massive influence on your spirituality. What about your family?
Oh, sorry, that was the question. Oh my God.
I find it, this is the thing, I find it so interesting, but also because it also makes me, I'm trying not to be stereotypical, but I'll put my hands up and take accountability for it. I am thinking, you know, at the same time, America's very religious. It has a lot of denominations of the church, of the Christian church. So it'll be interesting to know what is your family like with regards to spirituality and religion and witchcraft, and what do they think about your journey as well, depending on what your family history is like too.
Well, yes, you can take it, you know, like you don't have to take it. I mean, like I grew up Catholic, right?
Okay.
So
yeah.
I'm on my mom's side, I'm a 3rd-gen American. My mom's 2nd-gen American. Most of her family came from Ireland and Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my gran, so my great grandmother had a lot of kids, and my grandmother spent some time in care, in which you can imagine in Boston and immigrant communities, like, wasn't a great place. My gran, my mom's mom, you know, we only walked on this planet together for 7 years. She passed when I was 7, but we were incredibly, incredibly close. My gran had 4 boys, and then my mom.
Yeah.
And then another girl. And so like I was her daughter's first child, her daughter's first daughter, and like that.
Like the mother line started. Exactly. Yeah.
That all being said, like growing up in basically like an Irish Catholic community. And then my dad, whose lineage is very mixed, but very, very British, very English, grew up, you know, on the South Shore in Weymouth, Massachusetts, in, again, a Catholic community. So like on both sides of my family, Catholicism was how people, I suppose, like were in relationship with the divine. And so I grew up going to Sunday school, going to church most Sundays. You know, I have received, like, I've had communion.
Yeah.
I've had confession. I've been confirmed. Yeah. You know, soldier of Christ, you know, all of those things. I went to a Catholic all girls high school, you know?
Yeah.
So
now I've got images of the craft, of the craft in my head.
I mean, I wasn't goth enough. I was too much of a nerd, and a musical theater nerd and dancer, and performer. But I think growing up within religion, within Catholicism, what definitely influenced who I was.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think, but at the same time, I was at the Milton Public Library, you know, every weekend, every summer, and I read every single book about witchcraft that library had. Yeah. By the time I was 10, you know, like I was
already being called to it.
Yeah. And I also, like, you know, I have a degree in philosophy. Like I've always been, I think, you know, religion and spirituality, I think, for me, at the center of all of that is like human beings asking fundamental questions about who we are and why we're here and how we relate to one another. And so I've always been really hungry for that kind of for understanding humanity, understanding, you know, maybe less on a scientific level and more on a vibes level, like, you know, really understanding the who, the what, the how, the why, the questions that we've been asking ourselves for thousands of years, right? So I remember being like every Halloween wanting to be a witch, and being really hungry to understand magic and understand like the unseen, and understand like the divine. You know, I was definitely like, I was a nerd and a goody two shoes at school, but I would get into CCD, Catholic Christian doctrine, on a Sunday after church and listen to often men, um, tell me stories. Like, so like the Bible stories and like like Catholic stories were part of my folklore growing up, right?
Yeah.
And read it from the very beginning. I remember being like, what is this nonsense? Like, and just asking so many questions, putting my hand up and being like, that doesn't make sense to me. Or like, explain that. Like, I remember saying to my mom, I did a book report on Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the first American Supreme Court justice, first female woman Supreme Court justice. And I remember being like, and that was when I was again, like 7, 8, being like, why is she the only woman who gets to make the laws of this land? Like, that doesn't seem right. And it was the same kind of thing, like already picking these stories of like gender and just like, you know, that can't be real. Or like, or is it witchcraft or is it magic? And like just trying to make sense of it all, but also getting in trouble for it. Like in my desire to understand how these stories that I was being told, often by men, like make it make sense.
Yeah.
And then being told to shut up, being removed from Sunday school, like taken, like I remember one dude took me into like a little closet and yelled at me, like for, you know, being disruptive. And I'm like, I'm just asking questions.
Yeah.
And so I think about like, and so in terms of, you know, my family, it got to a point where, you know, my mom, I talk about like my dad passed in 2021 and I have so much love for both my mom and my dad. You know, but I would say like my dad was a very gentle, very like, you know, sort of soft power, like, you know, just like kind of like taught me about soft power, which is great. And my mom, like, she was the boss, like she ran the house, you know, and maybe my mom and my dad would disagree, but that's how it's felt to me.
Yeah.
But finally, you know, after so much, like my mom's like, okay, you don't have to go to Sunday school anymore. And like, I did my confirmation a year after all my peers, because like, this feels like a lot of bullshit to me. But she's like, just be confirmed. Because what if you ever want to get married in a Catholic church? I'm like, I won't, I promise you. And I haven't either time, frankly. I think, you know, my parents were a product of their families, which were, I think, the dominant like spirituality was Catholicism.
Yeah.
But I never, and I did, like I said, I did feel some pressure, but in the end, like, you know, both my parents really supported all three of us to become who they are, even if they didn't understand, become who we are, even if they didn't fully understand it. And I think a really beautiful example of like having like over the years, like my family not understand me, you know, and my brother and sister, like, you know, I feel like, you know, they like have their own forms of spirituality. And, you know, my brother is you know, we're all sort of artists at heart. And so like, I think there's even when my family didn't necessarily understand me, like I think there was probably judgment along the way, but as we all get older, we all become more of who we are. Like there's also a lot of grace, and there are definitely, like, I remember telling my parents that I was moving to Nicaragua and instead of going to law school. They weren't huge fans of that, but neither did they like cut me off or stop me from doing it. And, you know, and I remember like my mom coming to visit me in Nicaragua, and she was like, I get it.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you want to live here? It's amazing. And also when I started to go kind of deep into spirituality and, you know, identifying as a witch, like, you know, I think, you know, there's a lot of eye rolls and like, you know, I could put my brother and like, you know, being like, oh, Meghan, she's being weird and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, like the people, like love, like coming back to love, and the people who love you and their capacity to see you and meet you. Oh, I think, you know, about, gosh, it was probably in 2021. And then you have two examples of how we, you know, through the lens of love and acceptance, like, you know, you can grow, like people, no matter how old they are, people can grow and meet you and see you. And maybe they don't necessarily like practice and share the same, you know, the same sort of like fundamentals, but you know, you can still meet each other. Like, so 2021, I was Louisa Darling, who founded Barefoot Festival and also the Witch Festival in Cornwall, which is where we met. Louisa and I had been kind of working together for a few years, and she said, "Oh, I'm going to do up near Boston, here in the UK. I'm going to do Wild Woman Camp. Would you come and help me out?" I said, "Absolutely," and it was fucking brilliant. Sorry, was around this?
You can swear on us.
Okay.
It's fine. Yeah, it's a safe space.
And it was such a brilliant weekend. And Louisa, like, I think I ended up doing quite a few things throughout the weekend. And one of the final things that, so what I should have said is that the Wild Women Camp fell during one of my mom's visits. And I said, "Mom, if you want, you can stay in Surrey, or you can come with me to this Wild Women Camp. We're going to be like, there's eco-loos, and we're going to be sleeping, I think, in a converted school bus. And there's going to be all sorts of things going on." And she said, "Yeah, sure, I'll go." So at the time, my 73-year-old mom drove her up to this Wild Women Camp, and she threw herself into it. And the very last thing that we did was I'm a big fan of rites of passage, and have received many rites of passage and have channeled many rites of passage. And I think that they're an incredibly important way to honor the transitions in our lives and honor the sort of the parts of who we are, whether it's, whether it's maiden rites of passage or like enchantress rites of passage. I do father rites of passage, whether it's like the passed down through the Munaki, like the rite of the womb, like whatever rites of passage are, I think they're, for me, incredibly important. Anywho, I had already, even before my mum was coming to this, I had agreed with Louisa to offer the mother rites of passage, which is around honoring the mothering energy, and whether that's biological mothering or the mothering of relationships or businesses or creative pursuits, like that energy that we all carry regardless of age and our life's pathways. And I transferred the mother rites of passage to my mother, and she was the very last one to receive in a group of about 40 women. And the way you do it, the way I do rites of passage, is that everyone has the opportunity to be witnessed in your rite of passage. So you can invite energies into, the space. And I'm sorry, no, this is 2022. Because I'm having flashbacks to like why my mom was visiting. She was visiting because I was packing up to move to Cornwall, and she like came over to pack 1 million boxes for me. So sorry, I just had a flashback. I was like, why would she know? It's 2022. And I'll tell you why I now remember that. Because what ends up happening in this rite of passage is that I perceived it through the land and through my traditions. And then I would say to, let's say, my mom, you've come to receive the mother rites of passage. I channel them through Kerr, like Kerr, the mother of Cornwall, and the mother Gaia energy of the land here. And I would say, who comes to witness you? And what the women have already done is gathered in groups of 3 or 4, and they've written out who they'd like to witness them. And then they ask the other women in their small groups to stand in for those energies. And so my mom, for example, brought my dad, who had passed away the year before. And I can't even remember, because it was so emotional, the other energy that she brought in. And basically what we did was we stood in a circle. So my mom in front of me, and then one of the women standing in for my dad and sharing the message that my mom had written, and the other woman standing in. And then there was a woman behind her. And so we were forming a circle with a circle of women around us. Right. Mm-hmm. And I transferred that rite of passage. And when I say that, like, something between my mom and I shifted, and something energetically, like, in a way that, in no amount of therapy, no amount of conversation, like, not that we have much to heal, me and my mom. I love her to fucking bits, but like, something shifted. Like, she saw me, I saw her. And the feedback that I've received from those 40 women was that something shifted in them. Like, some sort of healing happened in them, generations before and after. And like, we were just in this if that's not magic, I don't know what is. Yeah. So, my mom and I spoke briefly about it afterwards, and she found it incredibly important and emotional. Like, but like, just for her to be there that weekend and for her to receive, because you can always opt out of anything I offer. The choice is the most important thing, right? She chose to be in that circle. She chose to be there that weekend, and she chose to participate. Her choosing saw me in a way that, like, I am so grateful for, despite the fact that she grew up in mom didn't work and her dad was a butcher. Yeah. And she grew up in like a working class immigrant community. And yet in her 70s, she's standing in a field in Boston, England, receiving a mother rite of passage from her daughter. Like, if that's not magic, I can't tell you what is. And when I went back for Christmas, we had said, like, it's such a costly thing to travel to the States these days. And my son and my husband and the three of us went back. And so we said, no presents, right? Please, no one get us presents. We're not getting you presents.
You are the gift.
Our present is the present. But, on Christmas morning, my mom hands me a bag. And I said, Mom, come on. And she had made an altar cloth for me. Because I sit in a lot of circles. I can always create a center, an altar. And so she created an altar piece with an embroidered rose that she had hand embroidered at the center. And I guess that's a side quest about my relationship with the divine and the Marys and the rose. But she knows how much the rose means to me. So she had embroidered a rose, and then she had taken my dad's ties, and she had hand sewn the big end of the ties into a massive circle to make an altar cloth. And so she had written the most beautiful letter to accompany the altar cloth. And so I opened it up, and immediately I just intuitively knew what this was. And so like my son is yapping, my husband's like, it's Christmas morning. Yeah. We're all just having a coffee and opening a few gifts. And I drop to the floor, open up the altar cloth, and just proceed to lose it. And it was on it was on so many levels. Like, the gift in of itself, knowing how long that took my mom to make, who doesn't have a sewing machine, who did it all by hand.
Oh my gosh.
First and foremost, like, for her, like the workman, the craft. I mean, that in and of itself. But then the fact that she knows how much my dad meant to me. She knows how much lineage and legacy mean to me. And she made something tangible that I could use in my spiritual practice on a regular basis that not only recognizes my lineage, but she also understands that, like, how much, like, I bring my dad's soft masculine energy into the work that I do, to have, like, and then also just to look around this and then see all these ties, because my dad was an art teacher, and that's what he did. He wore a tie every day to work, and I could remember these ties throughout my life. He wore a tie every day. And it just was like all of that coming together, and just like, my mom just getting me and just seeing me and knowing that was the most perfect present that I could receive. And so, no, I didn't grow up. I'm not like a third generation witch. Right?
No, but
and this kind of goes back to, like, the center of what I think being a witch is. Like,
yeah,
I've chosen this path by people who I wouldn't say are particularly spiritual or even religious anymore. But in the center of, like, how I practice being a witch is personal choice and power, connection with place and land and lineage and legacy and community. And I had parents who just supported me to be whoever I wanted to be in all my weird and witchy ways from the time I was young. And that, for me, for this witch, that was probably the best foundation, because I'm a learner, like, I'm a student of life. And, I would have loved to, like, if there was someone in my life who was practicing sort of the cunning ways or the old ways, like, I probably would have gravitated to them and wanted to learn. But what the absence of that, I guess, has given me is the permission to find my own way and to be exactly who I'm meant to be. And I think that is probably the thing that most defines my identity and my practice as a witch. I've found my own way. And part of that means that I have spent a long time interrogating and reevaluating my relationship with the divine within, the divine around me, investigating, like and how it's been, I would say, perverted and, taken overlayered by capitalism and patriarchy. And, like, going back to who the Marys were, and, Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary, are, I would say, at the very, the epicenter of my spirit guide team, and understanding how much the lack of the divine feminine in my upbringing influenced, like, a lot of my teens and 20s and probably into my 30s. And then the reclamation of the divine feminine has been, again, I would say, part and parcel to me, claiming being a witch, and understanding like the divine that is in nature all around us, the divine that's in me, the divine that's in you, and the interconnectedness of all of that. When I grew up in a religion that told me because I wasn't a man, I couldn't be divine, that the divine was something other and that the divine was masculine. And I think about that all the time. Like, what if someone had said to me, like, you are divine, like you are spirit, you are spiritual, you don't need to try and ascribe to anything else but you. Like, that would have saved me a lot of therapy and a lot of time, particularly in my 20s, and probably led me to some different decision making. But it's all, it's all this continuum, I think, without having been raised Catholic, like I wouldn't have these amazing spirit guides now. I wouldn't have my relationship with the divine feminine, which I think sits at the heart of being a witch. I wouldn't then, through the divine feminine and the connection to the earth being divine and feminine to me, like I wouldn't have my connection with the land, which is so important. And also without growing up, as a third gen, and sort of like again, like just not in the shadow of Salem, but the shadow of like being in an Irish Catholic immigrant community, I wouldn't have the connection to my Celtic lineage, which, come back to your very first question, is like, that's what, I'm not living in Ireland, but I feel like Cornwall is not even second best. Like, Cornwall is fucking brilliant. And I think that's why I feel so at home here.
Yeah.
Like, the ancient Celtic land and the fierceness and the feminine that has of the energy that is Cornwall, and that of all the people that has walked this land before us, like, it does feel so wonderful to be here. And like, I've told this story on my own podcast and like in lots of other places, but like the pandemic also helped me reconnect to my Celtic ancestry, because I was meant to, in like probably June 2020, I was meant to go to Peru with Rochelle Sheik, who's the founder of Koya, which is an amazing movement practice that I have the privilege of teaching. And I was meant to go to Peru, but it was June 2020.
Yeah.
No trips, right? And so knowing that was canceled, it was like, it opened up a door to find the magic of this land here, and knowing that you don't, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to be able to pilgrimage to, places like Peru, or, or the ancient Sophic temples in Greece, or Mary Magdalene sacred sites in southern France, like or Rishikesh in India, where I did my yoga training. Like, it's a privilege, and it's beautiful to be able to go to those places. But what if we didn't have, like, what if we could also pilgrimage to, with the same impact and with the same magic, just to the land that's on our front door?
Yeah.
And that's what the pandemic took away, that possibility of pilgrimaging, like of taking pilgrimages all over the world, to be like, I'm deeply craving connection to land and magic and self and nature. And I can't go far. I can only go with 10 minutes from my house. So, and that's when I started to really listen to the land here.
Take stock of where you are.
And like every day, every single day, like when we would go out for our, government mandated exercise, we, because of where I live, it's 10 minutes from the moor, 10 minutes to the shore. So, some days we walk on the moor, some days we walk on the beach with our puppy at the time. And my husband would be like, we'd been together for years, like, oh gosh, you're really quiet when we go on the walks. And he's like, what are you thinking? I said, I'm not really thinking, I'm just listening. I'm listening to this land. It's so loud. It has so much to say. And one of the first big messages that Cornwall gave me was, if you want to, you should gather women here. And, and so I said one day, he's like, well, what does the land say? Like, what is it? What are you listening to? And I said, it's telling you to gather women here, and he was like, well, why don't you? And he's like, why don't you, why don't you run a retreat from the house? We have all these extra bedrooms. Why don't you run a retreat from the house? And so I put a message out to about 12 women in sort of May 2021, said, if I were to run a retreat here in Cornwall, would you want to come? And 9 women said yes.
Yeah. And
that's really where it all began. And that was the beginning of Sacred Kerno.
And we'll get into Sacred Kerno in a bit. I just want to say, like, when you were talking about your family and your mother and your father and your upbringing, and I could see that that touched you and you got quite vulnerable and quite emotional there. And I ended up getting quite emotional as well because I could feel how much it meant to you. And I just want to say thank you for being so open with that. Because it's still getting me quite emotional now. So I think we're just going to take a quick break so we can just recenter ourselves, have a drink, and then we'll come back into it. But I just wanted to say, thank you for feeling like you could be so vulnerable in that moment and sharing such a really, really beautiful story. Oh my gosh.
Thank you for giving me the space to.
You're welcome.
Thank
you. Do you know about the different types of tears?
No, tell me.
Oh my God.
But I know that like under the microscope, different they look.
Yeah, but we are different. We have different types of tears. So our body produces 3 types of tears. So when we cry and we get emotional, that type of tear is completely different compared to when our eyes are just watering to clear or filter something out. And then there is another type of tear. I always forget what the other one is. But we have 3 types of tears. And then under the microscope, our purge, our emotional purge tears look very different to when our eyes are just like irritated or just trying to clear something out. It's very, very interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
So much that we don't know about energy, and but again, that's magic.
Yeah,
and we are magic, and that like again, that feels like that is. How can you deny that we are not divine beings? Like that, and our soul gets to show up in so many different ways, and our spirit gets to show up in so many different ways through these human meat suits that we wear.
Oh yes,
I think that's phenomenal. It would be totally a cool and a normal thing to collect our tears and to do spell work with them.
Yeah.
That, like, 15 years ago, I would be like, that's a bit, like, oh, that, I wouldn't even know what to make of that phrase. And now it feels like such a natural thing to say, that I don't even, like, like looking at like distance traveled, it's like, it's life is amazing. That I'm just like, okay, of course we're going to collect tears and we're going to do spell work with them. It's going to be like,
it's like we need a little reminder on like our Apple Watches as soon as it senses us crying, like, hey, do you want to save those?
hey, get out of the little jar.
Yeah, quick, save them.
Yeah, because I'll get great next week when you do a release and a banishing spell. Yeah. All right,
very good.
So, those retreats have now evolved into, I've run 17 retreats from my home in Liskeard, between the moors and the shores. About 20 months ago, I have been running online containers and circles for a while. And I was also sort of coaching some of my friends and to run their own circles in their own communities. And I was deeply craving a community here.
Yeah.
In Cornwall. And so after having done a lot of work online and like as a way to sort of kind of keep the community of people who came to Sacred Carno and the retreats here going, I was like, I've got to be the person that I need. And I've got to start doing in-person circles here. It feels like the time.
Before you came to Cornwall, had you run sort of spiritual circles, sister circles in other parts of the UK?
Yes. So I'd run a number of retreats and day retreats, weekend retreats in the UK, in Portugal, in Nicaragua. Like I've been teaching Koya, which is basically like a circle, a movement circle.
Could you explain Koya just a little bit more for my listeners who are probably thinking, this sounds amazing, but what is it?
Okay, let me spell it for y'all first. So Koya is spelled Qoya. Koya as a word translates it into queen or wise person in Quechuan. Again, I mentioned Rochelle a number of times, but Rochelle, she founded Koya, I don't even know, like over 15 years ago. She had spent a lot of time in Central and South America, and the Quiro people gifted her the name Koya to use in this movement practice. Yeah. And she does a huge amount of reciprocal work still with the Koya community, with the Quiro community, and it's a really, I would say, please go on the Koya website and read about the lineage of Koya and about cultural appreciation versus appropriation and the reciprocal relationship that the Koya as a community has with the Quiro. I think it's a really, really strong example of solidarity work. So anyways, Koya is based on the principle that we can remember our essence is wise, wild, and free, like nature.
Yeah.
And in a Koya class, so it's fundamentally movement practice, but a Koya class has 13 pillars that you move through. Every class has a theme, and then every and the same structure, but the freedom of every Koya class is that the theme changes and the playlist changes. But what we do in Koya is that at the beginning we experience like a somatic grounding meditation to move out of our heads and into our bodies. We then do a card pull, so we activate our intuition by pulling an oracle card, and then we share what that oracle card means with a partner. So we're speaking it out. This is not like a lot of like more spiritual, I would say, movement classes. Like it's a lot of internal stuff, but there's also the opportunity throughout a Koya class to share if you want, if you choose. So, you choose an oracle card, you can journal, or you can turn to a partner and share what that means. Then when we move from sitting to standing, we set an intention.
Yeah.
We then circle that intention through our bodies, which also brings in the natural elements, just as like the earth is 70% water, our bodies are 70% water. We sort of move into that circular fluid movement. So we invoke nature as we're moving.
And we have a lovely silver celestial ore in the sky that rules our tides, and
exactly that. So we circle, and then we do a heart opening, and then we drop it to our hips, and we do hip opening, and into like sort of a cauldron in our bellies of creation. And then we dance, we come back to our intention, and we do a yoga sequence, but we dance our yoga as prayer. So if our intention was like a wish or a desire or a prayer, like what would it look like to express your intention through your body, to dance your prayers? And from there, we move into a shadow contrast dance. So like I said, every class has a theme. And in the shadow contrast dance, we just for a few moments explore the fullness of that theme. So what might it feel like if our theme for the class is gratitude? What might it feel like in your body when you're not connected to gratitude? And we just explore that through one song, one movement. After that, we move into somatic shaking, looking at movement. It can be alchemy. If movement can change how we feel, even for a few moments. Then we moved into choreographed dance, which sounds a little scary, but it is often just a very basic, joyful experience. And then we move into a free dance, which is the full expression of the theme. Then we come back to partner sharing. We do a partner share, just about, maybe a soul moment from the class and what you might be taking away. We do some stretching, and then we begin as we started with grounding and just rest at the end. So that's the arc of Koya. It's, if you've done like Naya or 5 rhythms or ecstatic dance, it has echoes of all of that, but it's a very unique structure.
Yeah.
And Koya is, again, if I look at like in my spiritual journey, like the things that have fundamentally changed my life. When I found Koya in 16, I was living up in my head.
Yeah.
And through, I did my first Koya class. I found Koya, I listened to a podcast with Michelle being interviewed, and I was like, what is this? I must do it. I was really lucky that there was a woman who was teaching about an hour away from me. A week later, after I heard the podcast, I booked onto her class, and by the end of it, I was like, I don't care. I don't care how. I'm going to learn how to teach this. This is my thing. And I've not looked back. Like I've become a teacher trainer. So I run trainings here in the UK for anyone who's interested in becoming a Koya teacher. But like Koya was my sort of gateway into embodiment, and into my body and what is somatics and embodiment like all code for me? It's feeling. And I think for a lot of my life, I definitely not particularly with when I was in my first marriage, which was very controlling. My ex-husband is a qualified narcissist. And I, in order to keep the peace, I definitely dulled parts of myself. I kind of I put my heart in a cage to protect it.
Yeah.
And it was finding Koya and getting out of my head and into my heart and into my body and feeling things again that ultimately, within a very short period of time, it let me out of that marriage. And since then, I've just rededicated my life time and time again to feeling, to embodiment, to somatics, to love. And so I would, if anyone's listening, please go up to the Koya website. There's lots of free videos on there if you want to experience it. There are about 50 teachers throughout the UK. So if you have any questions, if you're interested in taking a Koya class, there's definitely a lot in the South. Sorry to my northern witches, but there are a few northern Koya teachers. Please let me know, and I'm happy to put you in touch with, because there's nothing like doing a Koya class in person. It is like a spell. And I have had some of the most transformational experiences of my life in
Yeah.
Koya classes, because it's like the invitation to feel, to notice,
Mhm.
and then to notice what your body's doing and how you feel moment to moment. Like that, just that invitation alone can be revolutionary.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you have any men, or have you had any men
Yeah,
come
I've
to your
talked to
choir?
men. I definitely like,
Yeah.
it's particularly, I teach at a lot of festivals. So
Yeah.
I think, I don't change how I teach too much when when like men and women and non-binary folks are all in the space. Like,
Yeah.
I think the way I teach is hopefully very open and inclusive.
Yes.
And I don't say things like, drop into your womb space. Like I use, like, I would say, as much as I am a massive feminist and like,
Mhm.
believer in women's rights, all women's rights.
Mhm.
I am also, I also want to be as inclusive as possible, especially when it comes to embodiment. Like,
Yeah.
I think men I think a lot of what we were talking about before we started this podcast, which is like the political landscape in America.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if men could just fucking feel more and be a bit more empathetic, like, things might look a little differently across the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, men. I think men absolutely need spaces like Hoya to get out of their heads and into their bodies and feel a little more in places where, like, where they feel okay to feel. So much of patriarchy has told men that they need to be a certain way, just as it's told women they need to be a certain
Yeah.
way. And those limited gender roles don't like, they impact everyone. They hurt
Yes.
everybody.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really like, as much as like, a lot of my violence against women and girls work has shown me that, women need spaces to explore where they feel like, I never guarantee anyone's going to feel any certain way, including safe. Like, because
Mhm.
safety is a feeling, and your nervous system dictates your feeling.
Yeah,
of safety.
especially if someone's traumatized, they have PTSD, you know.
Exactly
Yeah.
that. But I think, just knowing that I know, and knowing the ubiquity of the experience of domestic abuse and sexual violence, I think for folks to be able to, women especially, to be able to come into a space where they feel they can explore, where they feel like they can notice how they're feeling, where they feel they can move without a male gaze, I think is really important. But I also, as much as I, will offer women's circles and women's spaces, like, more and more, I want to offer spaces for everyone.
Yeah.
Because the tools and these practices are for everyone.
Yeah.
And should be accessible for everybody. But yeah, I mean, Koya is, I'm not going to say it's going to change your life, but if it didn't, I'd be surprised.
So this is something that you do within Sacred Kerno, and you were running with other sister circles, women's circles, prior to moving to Cornwall.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm not for question.
No, but I love that you explained Koya so beautifully before we got into more of your practice. Yeah.
So yeah, I was teaching Koya, right?
Yeah.
Which is basically like bringing together a community in circles, and then running retreats, and also, kind of incorporate. And then I got really curious about circles, and just generally circles that didn't necessarily involve movement. And so, just again, kind of like springboarding off of the community that I created in Surrey and Hampshire, started to bring in other sort of like magic into my offerings. And then, the pandemic happened, and I took all of my offerings online, and, the festivals the festivals moved online. So I was teaching at online festivals. I was teaching online Koya. I was, bringing together people for online workshops. And then when the pandemic started to lift in 2021, I started hosting things in Cornwall as well. Like the first retreat in August 2021, a week after my dad died, by the way. My passport had expired, and I literally we ended up doing his celebration of life a year and a half later, but I desperately wanted to be back, but I couldn't. Like, so I had to wait for a new passport, an emergency passport. So it was like, on this fence, I was like, I've been waiting for this retreat to happen. My dad's just died. Like, what do I do? And I just asked my dad, I asked Spirit, and just said, if I'm meant to be in America sooner than after the retreat, then something will happen. And it was an impossibility. And I'm so glad I did. And I felt so held by him and his energy and his blessing. Because that first retreat really started to unlock more of the in-person stuff post-pandemic, and brought me back into, I'd gotten this online safety blanket, and then I was like, no, and now I don't do anything online at the moment. I probably will. I've been kind of feeling a call back to offering some free, not, and I say free, like just some unconditional stuff online. Because I feel like everything that's like free on everything online is like a sales pitch for something else. That's just me. That's just me. Like, just me like hating
I think
capitalism.
everyone's just hustling these days, aren't they?
It's just a hustle.
hard,
And I'm so not about the hustle. I'm about, as I say, my sister says, you're not a businesswoman. I'm like, yes, I drink the vibes, not the business acumen. I am not an MLM either. I am just, I feel like I want to share so much of what's in my heart. And like, wow, this is so many side quests in one sentence.
I'm loving it.
So I will come back. I don't even know what I'm, but I will come back. No,
I'm like your guide. I love it. It's like I'm living the side quest, and then I'm like kind of like pulling you back to the center again. It's fantastic.
You could only just do this in every day. It's like my ADHD combined with my perimenopause, and it's just like 1,000 threads open up in one time, like a giant loom in my brain. Bullets. Where were we?
I'm so sorry. Now I'm not
we're both confused. What's happened? But braiding sweetgrass, and the author of which I've said her name 1,000 times, but the mashed potatoes or the perimenopause in my brain is keeping me away from her name. But braiding sweetgrass and the service berry are two books that have fundamentally changed my life, and I really suggest it's like I invite you into the beauty that are these two books. And the gift economy is something that I have always thought about. Before I knew what it was, the gift economy and the Indigenous American concept of the gift economy has, I think, really been part and parcel to who I am, and not, and really gone against like the capitalistic businesswoman that my husband really, I think hoped he was marrying, which is just never existed. But the gift economy basically says, there's beyond that exchange of payment, there's so much more. There's like payment is only one way of expressing exchange of value.
Yeah.
And I do, I try to keep all of my offerings, because I do think we still live in a capitalistic world.
We do.
And I have costs like to do what I do. So, but I do try to keep all of my offers really financially accessible. And if someone cannot afford to come, I don't care. I say that, and I really mean that. Like, all my circles that I offer 2 circles a month, and it's always £10. But if someone can't, but there's always gifted spaces.
Yes.
I have so many banked gifted spaces from women who, either couldn't come, and said, like, I always say, like, if you can't come to a circle, I'll transfer your space. And people always say, just bank it, gift it.
Yeah. That's
so
pay it forward.
Pay it forward.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the same with my retreats. Everything is like really, I think, economical for the amazing benefit that you get for yourself when you show up for yourself. But anyways, like the gift economy. And so like when I say like, I'm not offering things online, because I've really steered away from that. Like anything free that I offer is to bait and switch you into coming on a program or like joining something
subscription.
Like, what I'm really keen to offer, if I'm going to go back online into the online world, is things that come without that are unconditional gifts, because it feels too important not to create these containers. And that's kind of what I'm seeding into this year ahead, is leaning into. I've had the privilege of developing my gifts and my knowledge throughout my life, and I feel really called not to say like this is my way, this is the only way, but to say like this is a way, and my invitation is for you to choose maybe what you'll do with these invitations. And so, that's kind of where I'm at. So like I was doing a lot of online stuff, ran the first retreat, and that's just kicked off like the last time was 5 years of running longer containers. I think longer containers with community care leading up to a retreat, and community care extending long after a retreat ends. Like, I think that is how I work. I love a longer container of exploration and magic. And then, like I said, in about 20 months ago, I said, I've got to walk the talk and be what I need in this world. So I've been calling the sacred Kurno being the Cornish name for the land we live on, sacred being like my devotional practice to land, lineage, self, and community. And I just put it out in the world. I started in like April 2024. I held the first circle, and this coming week, I'm holding the 34th circle.
Oh, incredible.
And so much like a Koya experience, like each circle follows the same arc. And I think that the containers, that's the structure. So at any circle you come to, you kind of know the arc of where we're going, but the themes change. The activities that I share to embody a theme changes every time.
I hope you all enjoyed listening to part 1 of this 2-part episode. It was such a joy to speak with Meghan. We ended up talking for over 4 hours during this podcast episode. I mean, Meghan can talk for America and I can talk for England. So the two of us together, we just covered so much, and I've just had to split it into 2 sections. Otherwise, it would have been around, I think, overall about 2.5 hours long. So I hope that you enjoyed this first part, and Meghan returns next week for the conclusive part of this 2-part episode. Okay, and now on to our Witch Weekly events, where I let you know what witchy or spiritual events are happening in and around South Devon and Cornwall, starting with local covens that are seeking new members. So if you're a solitary witch looking to join a coven, this might be for you. With us again is Roz and Booker, one of Cornwall's longest established covens, and they hold meetings in North Cornwall and the Devon-Cornwall border. Applicants are welcome to introduce themselves via email and can visit their website for more information. The Cunning is a witch occult shop and temple based in Plymouth. They currently hold the Coven of the Sacred Grove. They are a diverse group of witches from different paths that come together to learn and support each other. With their coven, they break the year down into 4 seasons. Season 1 is looking at runes, Ogham, and magical languages. Season 2 looks at magical herbalism. Season 3 is trance work and otherworldly travel and flight. And Season 4 looks at magical charms. The Physical Coven meets on Tuesday and Thursday nights fortnightly. They also have an online coven with spaces available too. Everyone is in a group together each week, and sometimes they drop different techniques and teachings from PDFs, slides, and videos. Joining the coven comes with a range of benefits too. You can get money off on the shop and services, and you can also make use of the coven library, which is for local members only. To join the Physical Coven, it's £30 per person, and if you wanted to join the online coven, that is £15. If you would like to get in touch, you can message them through their Instagram page or Facebook, and I've also added their email address in the show notes. The Physical Coven does have 3 spaces left. However, they have had a lot of interest, and they are thinking of starting up another night for people that can't attend Tuesdays or Thursdays. So there is possibility of more spaces coming up. If you run a coven or hold a sister circle in Cornwall or South Devon, and you're open to having new members join you, please let me know and I will give you a shout out on the next episode. Witchy and spiritual events. Continuing with the Cunning Grove, their usual Saturday morning Witch and Brew is continuing. It used to be called Witch, Bitch and Brew. However, it's now been shortened to Witch and Brew and has more of a teaching focus. Essentially, it's a social with tea and talk. That's Saturdays at the Cunning Grove from 11 a.m. until the last witch leaves. The Cunning Grove are also holding a Witch and Stitch on Wednesdays. It's a weekly crochet, knitting and a witchcraft session, and both of these are free. On Thursday, the 5th of February, Meghan Field is holding her Sacred Kerno Circle. This is around Imbolc and Brigid. It's 7 p.m. until 9 p.m. Join Meghan for an in-person women's Imbolc circle in Liskeard, where you will do a deep dive into the goddess Brigid. Together you will explore her stories, her powers, make your own Brigid's cross, and experience Brigid's fire blessing. I've linked the website in the show notes so you can book a space. Over the next few episodes on the podcast, I'm going to be doing a shout out for a day retreat that will be happening in Cornwall. This is being held by Echo Luminex and Body Soul Alignment, also known as Ellie and Victoria, and it's called the Inner Light Retreat. It will be held on Friday, the 20th of February. The Inner Light Retreat is going to be a 4-hour space created for anyone who is affected by cancer. The retreat was born from lived experience. For Victoria, it was a space that she desperately needed while she was going through cancer. And for Ellie, it's a space that she felt she was unable to fully offer when she was working as an oncology nurse. Together, they are creating what they both felt was missing. This is a space outside of hospitals, tests, treatments, and expectations. a space to reconnect with yourself, a space to come back to the body and to explore a gentle, holistic approach that can support your healing journey, not replace modern medicine, but walk alongside it. Through different practices and approaches, they invite participants to try, feel, and discover what resonates for them, to move from feeling like only a patient to becoming an active participant in their own recovery, with curiosity, courage, and compassion. This is a space to rest, to feel, to reconnect with your inner light, and to remember that you are more than a diagnosis. You can book your space for yourself or a loved one for only £44, and I have linked Ellie's website in the show notes. If you would also like to have a chat or ask them any questions, I have also got a link to their Instagram page as well. The Cabinet of Folklore and Magic down in Falmouth are holding their tarot readings on Saturday mornings. Thank you so much for listening to the Cornish Witch Podcast. This podcast is an independent personal project created outside of my professional life. It exists as a space for conversation with witches, spiritual practitioners, and those walking their own paths, sharing lived practice, ritual, experience, and folklore often rooted here in Cornwall and the land itself. If you value these conversations and would like to support the continuation of the podcast, there is a voluntary link in the show notes. Listening will always remain free and there is no expectation to contribute. Whether you support here, listen quietly, or carry these stories onward by sharing them with others, thank you. Your presence honours the craft and keeps these tellings alive. May these stories find you when they are meant to. And until next time, may the path rise to meet you.